Let's get to what happened last night. Let's talk about the police raiding the anti-war encampment at UCLA.
We begin with breaking news and live pictures out of Los Angeles, where police are raiding an encampment of demonstrators on the campus of UCLA after a day of tensions. Again, these are live pictures coming into the newsroom at this very moment. The group protesting the war in Gaza had been warned to clear out, but many refused to comply. Again, we just want to reiterate, this just happened minutes ago. Police fired what appeared to be non-lethal rounds at some of the...
Bro, this is literally like, this is autocracy bullshit, okay? It's such a sad state of affairs. I mean, this happens in American history throughout times, but like this severity, this intensity, and this frequency is kind of new when you think about it. What do I mean by this? I feel like oftentimes like police show this level of like state violence when like students or people actually take it to a level where they're like taking fucking deans hostage and shit, you know what I mean? Which they did in the 60s. These are just kids sitting on the fucking courtyard of their public institution in public space, doing a public demonstration with perfectly valid, reasonable demands that they are making from their own universities. And the fact that they have done no violence whatsoever, the fact that they've demonstrated perfect messaging discipline, perfect organizational discipline, in spite of the endless sea of attacks, this is how the university and the state responds. It's just so gross, man. And I'm really glad that not only did I attend the encampment, but also Brett was there yesterday and Morgan was there yesterday. Like, we can attest to it. We have actual footage of how these guys operate inside of the encampment. It's just objectively false to look at the situation and go, these guys are actually being influenced by outside elements. They are bad. They're wrong. You know, they didn't do anything wrong. They did everything right, as a matter of fact. So it's so sad to see. It's so unimaginably cruel. So sad to see that these guys are getting met with this level of response. I mean, this is beyond the Trump shit. Cops in every single circumstance are the ones who often escalate. Police presence is usually how riots happen, how riots unfold, right? We've talked about this quite a bit during the Black Lives Matter rallies that occurred all around the country, some of which turned into riots as a consequence of police retaliation. And even then, the cause for BLM was just. Obviously, nothing came of it, and it was very frustrating. And I think that probably kicked out a lot of people from ever participating in political action ever again. Having said that, however, they're just students sitting and not doing anything, not harming anyone. And for weeks, the media tried to desperately paint them as villains over and over and over again. We have regressed beyond the Trump era at this point. This 100% was not a riot outside of pigs rioting. The students were incredibly disciplined and peaceful. Yeah. It is crazy. The media kept saying they're terrorists, they're terrorists, they're terrorists, they're terrorists. The media kept showing the outsiders, the counter-protesters, the Zionist agitators that actually went to the encampment to fuck these kids up. They looked at that and salivated at the prospect that they could show it as a clash. Clashes are occurring at the Palestinian encampment. It's like, they didn't do that. Do your fucking job, journalists. Cover the goddamn news. Your job isn't to be a stenographer for the State Department. Your job shouldn't be to cut propaganda for America's allies, a foreign country, Israel. Your job is to report what you see in front of your fucking eyes. Very frustrating to me. Very, very alarming, very frustrating to me that they desperately tried to make these students look like the bad guys here for the crime of saying what Israel is doing is unconscionable. It is so frustrating. And they did not give them a single fucking opportunity. These students did not give them a single opportunity. They were better than any other organized protest I've ever seen. They demonstrated perfect messaging discipline. They demonstrated perfect organizational capacity. They made sure that agitators did not breach the camp. They made sure that there was no fucking coverage. They made sure that if you wanted to talk to them, if you wanted to hear what they had to say, what their demands were, that they had media liaisons. And reporters lost their minds on it. They were like, oh, this is very, very frustrating. And then what did they get for basically doing the textbook perfect protest? Peaceful, perfect messaging discipline. What did they get? Everybody lied about them. Everybody relentlessly lied about them, both in Columbia and also at UCLA and at CCNY and every other campus. They lied about them. They said they're anti-Semitic. Anytime Zionist counter-protesters tried to fuck shit up, they looked at that as an opportunity to claim that it was actually the pro-Palestinian side that was causing trouble. They said that they desperately tried to find any kind of, like, from the thousands of students that are out there, they desperately try to come and find and manipulate and abuse any kind of counter propaganda they could to frame these students as evil. In protests like this one, you are going to have people who say things that are unhinged. You're going to have people that say anti-Semitic things, as a matter of fact. Okay? It's going to happen. There's thousands of fucking people. You understand? The fact that they couldn't get a single person is incredible. Okay? It's unimaginable. It is always going to happen. The fact that they couldn't get it and then they still lied about it is disgusting. Okay? The media's job is to basically look at this and go, here are the demands of the protests. Protests have been broadly very peaceful. Even if there are aspects of it that aren't, they're supposed to look at it and look at the percentages. The fact that they got 0% and yet still lied about it in an effort to galvanize some kind of violent military response from the police against these peaceful encampments is disgusting. And if you think that this won't come for you one day, you are in the wrong. I promise you. Okay? We have so many issues in this fucking country. The right and liberal Democrats alike are taking away more and more of your liberties. Think about the abortion conversation. This is an act against demonstration. Any kind of demonstration will be met with this violent response. If you think the American government won't inevitably come for something that you hold near and dear to you, something that you take for granted, a civil liberty that you care about, you'd be in the wrong. Because the actions that are unfolding in front of our eyes are simply an extension, a continuation of the violent Trump-era suppression of protests and demonstrations against the state. If you think that both liberals and Republicans alike would not use this exact same level of violence against you for the crime of protesting against abortion, for example, you'd be in the wrong. They will gladly do it. Anyway, let's continue.
The protesters, that was the pop, pop, pop that you just heard there. Those folks were sheltering behind a barricade. Because again, this is live pictures coming into the newsroom right now where you see, looks like hundreds of police officers in full riot gear now holding up weapons at those protesters.
I know they can restrict where you protest on public property. I'm saying that that's fucked up. They obviously are demonstrably doing that right now. They can declare an encampment or any kind of protest to be unlawful and give a lawful order to disperse. That doesn't make it right. You have to look at what the students are doing, what the students are saying, what the protest is about, and talk about the issue on the boundaries of morality. But there is certainly a legal defense for this as well under the First Amendment.
Carter Evans is at UCLA watching it all go down. Carter, good morning.
A very tense moment here, Vlad. Let me show you what's going on. We're at one end of the encampment right here, and you can see you've got some protesters here facing off with police. As we look up to the steps there, that's where the encampment is, and that's where the activity is right now. Every once in a while, you'll hear an explosion. That's police officers firing those rubber bullets or tear gas into the encampment. There are hundreds of police officers here. There are hundreds of people inside this encampment, along with hundreds more who have come to support them and form a human chain outside here. So it is really a standoff of sorts, at least on this side, while police clear out the campers inside. And this has been going on for more than 2 hours.
Police dressed in riot gear faced off with protesters as they attempted to clear an encampment that's been set up here at the UCLA campus. Those officers could be seen clashing with demonstrators as they conducted arrests. Earlier in the night, LAPD tried to enter the encampment but were quickly pushed back and retreated. The development signifies an escalation as officers for hours stood by as protesters vowed to stay and yelled at police. It comes one night after law enforcement was criticized for its delayed response to the brutal violence on campus. Some demonstrators rammed barricades, used pepper spray, and threw fireworks at the pro-Palestinian encampment.
They seem to want to terrorize us.
UCLA senior Yusuf said he needed 14 staples in his head after he was hit by a traffic cone and beaten with a piece of wood.
I thought the police would be our saving rescue. Instead, what ended up happening was we saw the police forming in a large group outside, seemingly watching the events unfold.
Police stood by for nearly 2 hours during that.
Yeah, that's what the university allowed to happen, by the way. They called in the cops, and the cops just sat there and fucking waited. Those were outside. Those were the real outside agitators, by the way. Those were the real outside agitators. They came onto campus. They didn't actually go there. They were coordinated. They had one goal, and that was to beat the shit out of the peaceful anti-genocide protesters. That was what their goal was. And the cops stood next to them. Would love to see Asmongold defend this. I don't think he knows that that happened. Because why should he know? It's not like mainstream media is constantly talking about this. If you're even paying attention even a little bit, the only thing you see is basically oh, these guys deserve it. These guys need to get fucking violently suppressed. They're being bad.
That confrontation, 15 people were reported injured, including one hospitalization.
Where was everybody? The whole world was watching. Where were they?
What do you think about the police response to the increase in violence?
There was no police response until very late.
Law enforcement activity is typically the last resort.
Sam Vinograd is a former top counterterrorism official.
As individuals are allowed to engage in unauthorized activity for attenuated periods, the possibility that things are going to turn violent unfortunately increases.
And so we have police here still making this effort to get inside the camp. Let's take a look at some of the live video that's coming in right now, and you can see police making their moves, trying to breach the barricade area. Campers had been reinforcing that all Tuesday. You could hear the power tools and the hammers, and they were also using zip ties to tie the fence together, anything to try and keep this barricade together and keep police out. But you can see they have made their way in now.
James O'Brien says something really interesting earlier. He said that Israel has solidified a generation of young people never, ever supporting them ever again as a direct result of their actions, and this shit just solidifies it. I agree.
Now, they've been using pepper spray, they've been using tear gas, they've been using rubber bullets, and they are now making arrests. As for where I am right now, I am on the other end of this encampment. We've got a big, large contingent of the California Highway Patrol right here, waiting to make their move in here.
These pictures are remarkable. remarkable coming into us right now, into the newsroom, when you see what looks like dozens, if not perhaps hundreds, of police officers in full riot gear, and they're trying to get on to clear this encampment. And again, Americans haven't seen scenes like this since the 1960s, when college campuses erupted over protests in Vietnam. And now we're seeing this again play out on college campuses all across the country. It looks like now barricades that protesters have set up. You can see those pieces of plywood that protesters are using to try and force the police back. They seem to be inching, inch by inch, to try to move these protesters off, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And of course, the fear is that somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Or even worse.
And when you look at the protesters, some are speaking and saying that we are protesting peacefully, and we are looking for support from the police. And then others are saying that the police are not offering that. They are actually doing the opposite.
From New York City Mayor Eric Adams that there are outside agitators who are taking part in some of these demonstrations. It's very difficult for police to know who the outside agitators are. Look at this.
It's not that difficult. It's mostly the people that are trying to beat on the fucking students, which, by the way, in this instance, it's the police themselves. They are the outside agitators.
It's dark. There are lights.
Most people are covered.
Being deployed. Exactly. People have their faces covered. So it becomes really, really difficult. And
oh, so if they didn't have their faces covered, you could tell just by looking at their faces if they're outside agitators or not?
Of course, the danger, as you see this police officer trying to tear down a barricade that presumably protesters put up, the danger is that somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, a lot of these protests happening across the country.